chosen one, anchor your spirit to what I am about to say right now. That question that has been sitting in the back of your mind, the one you have never said out loud to anyone, silence everything else and let it surface. Because I think you already know what that question is. It is the one that wakes you up at 3 in the morning and sits on your chest like a stone. It is the one that makes you stare at the ceiling in the dark and ask, what am I? Not who, what? I know the last 72 hours have carried a particular kind of weight, not the weight of failure, not the weight of grief, something stranger than both. Maybe you were in the middle of a conversation this week with someone religious, someone spiritual, someone who lives by the rules, and something inside you went completely quiet. Not agreement, not disagreement, just distance, like you were watching them through glass. Or maybe you were scrolling past the fire and brimstone content, past the love and light content, past every category that was supposed to claim you, and none of it landed, not one label fit. And that silence afterward was not peaceful. It was unsettling, because the question underneath it was getting louder. You feel like you exist in the space between two worlds, and neither world has sent for you. Heaven looks at you and sees someone who does not fit the mold. You have done things the holy would never confess to. You have walked through darkness that would make the righteous turn away, but hell cannot hold you either. Every time the darkness tried to seal the door, something in you refused to stay. Something ancient in your spirit kept climbing, kept surviving, kept arriving at mornings that should not have been yours. So now you exist in a place that has no name on any map anyone handed you. And the enemy has been working this week to turn that namelessness into shame. Listen to your thoughts. He has been whispering that the reason you do not fit is because something is fundamentally broken in you. He has been replaying that moment. Maybe it was this week, maybe it was years ago, when you tried to belong somewhere holy and felt like a fraud. Or that moment when you tried to belong somewhere dark and felt like a stranger. He has been telling you that the confusion you carry is evidence of corruption, that the in-between is where the rejected go, that God passed over you and the devil does not want you, and that means you are nothing. That is the lie, and I need you to hear me clearly when I tell you that lie has an expiration date, and it expires today. The enemy is screaming at you right now for one reason and one reason only. He knows what you are about to discover, because here is what heaven actually says about the ones who do not fit any category. Romans 8:14 says, "For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are sons of God." Not the ones who followed every rule, not the ones who never strayed, the ones led. The ones who, even in the wilderness, even in the in-between, even in the space between two worlds, kept following something they could not fully explain. Something that would not let them go fully dark. Something that would not let them stay fully still. That is not confusion. That is calling. What you have been calling your in-between is not a waiting room. It is not a purgatory. It is not evidence of rejection. It is the precise geography of a person who was never designed to live inside a box that other people built. The ones who are dangerous to the kingdom of darkness are not the ones who are always perfectly clean. They are the ones who walked through the fire, came out the other side, and still had something in them that would not bow. You have survived things that were designed to end you. You have walked out of rooms that were supposed to be your tomb, and every single time something in you kept moving. That is not accident, that is assignment. Think back to that moment this week when you felt the most unqualified, when you looked at your history and thought, there is no way heaven would claim something like me. You did not know it then, but that moment of honest reckoning was not your disqualification. It was your consecration. The enemy wanted you to read it as rejection, but the Spirit was reading it as readiness. You did not find this message by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. God did. This is a divine appointment that was written before the foundations of the earth were laid, specifically for the person who has been living in the nameless space, wondering why neither world will fully claim them. And the answer is coming right now. Stay until the very last second of this message, because in the next few minutes I am going to show you the exact biblical and spiritual architecture of who you actually are. I am going to hand you the language for the thing you have never been able to name. And at the end, I am going to give you a declaration that closes the door on every assignment of identity confusion the enemy has been running against your life. Do not click away. Your future self is standing on the other side of this message, waiting for you to finally have the words. If you leave now, you walk back into the namelessness without the verdict. And you have carried that question long enough. The heaviness you feel right now is not the weight of being lost. It is the weight of being found. It is the pressure of an identity that has outgrown the confusion that was containing it. The cord has been pulled as far as it will go. It is about to snap. You are not broken. You are not rejected. You are not the space between holy and evil. You are the reason that space exists at all. They told you to pick a side. The world handed you two boxes, saint or sinner, chosen or cursed, blessed or broken. And when you didn't fit in either one, they got uncomfortable. And here's what nobody told you. That discomfort wasn't yours to carry. That confusion was theirs. Because what you are doesn't have a category yet. And categories were never built for people like you. Some messages don't just inform, they activate. If something stirred deep in your spirit just now, you may be ready to receive the Chosen One's blueprint. The sacred guide reveals the 8 divine patterns behind your calling, your suffering, and your destiny. It also comes with the full audiobook, so you can absorb it during prayer, rest, or quiet moments with God. And for those called to speak His truth, you'll also receive Activating Your Prophet Mantle, a powerful bonus ebook for those carrying a prophetic assignment. The link is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited time. Now let's go deeper, because this is where most people stop. They feel the stirring. They sense that something about their life doesn't add up the way ordinary lives do. The suffering was too precise. The isolation was too strategic. The near misses and the narrow escapes had too much intention behind them to be random. And yet, instead of leaning into that, they shrink back. They talk themselves out of what they felt because nobody around them can confirm it. But let me say this plainly, you were never meant to be confirmed by the people in the room with you. You were meant to be confirmed by the one who designed the room. And the room itself is worth examining for a moment. Think about what it means to be in a room full of people who all seem to belong there. People who share the same language, the same assumptions, the same unspoken agreements about how life works and what it means to be favored. And then there's you. You have sat in those rooms. You have smiled at the right moments, nodded along with the conversation, and felt something deep beneath your sternum, quietly whispering that this is not your place, not because you were arrogant, not because you thought yourself better, but because something in you was already calibrated to a different frequency, and no amount of social effort could fully mask the mismatch. You weren't failing at belonging. You were succeeding at something they couldn't see, remaining faithful to a design that was too specific to be diluted into the crowd. Think about what happened to Enoch. The scripture doesn't give us chapters and chapters about his life. It gives us something almost startling in its brevity. He walked with God, and then he was not, for God took him. No death, no burial, no eulogy. He simply became unavailable to the world that couldn't hold him. And what strikes me about that isn't the miraculous ending, it's the life that preceded it. Enoch didn't perform miracles on a stage. He didn't build a movement or gather a following. He walked, quietly, intimately, in a direction nobody else was walking. And the world had no framework for him. Heaven didn't need to explain him. The Most High simply said, "This one is mine." And that was enough. That is a picture of what you are. Consider the weight of that image for just a moment longer. Enoch walked with God for 300 years before heaven claimed him. 300 years of walking in a direction that must have looked strange to every generation that passed through his lifetime. 300 years of a life that didn't follow the scripts and patterns of the culture around him. There is no record of public validation, no council that rose to honor him, No crowd that finally understood what he was doing and why. Just the quiet, unbroken intimacy of a man who had found the one relationship that made every other relationship's approval irrelevant. And when the fullness of time came, there was no complicated exit. God simply said, "You've walked far enough in their world. Come the rest of the way in mine." That is not tragedy. That is the most complete form of arrival a human life can reach. You are not confused. The systems that were built to classify people are confused by you, and there's a profound difference between those two things. One is a problem, the other is a sign. Let that land fully. Every system of classification, every personality framework, every religious box, every cultural category for success or failure, every diagnostic lens that well-meaning people have tried to press your life through, every one of those systems was built by human understanding, and human understanding has a ceiling. The moment you were fashioned with something that exceeds that ceiling, you became unclassifiable by design. The confusion that the world has projected onto you, the sideways glances when your story doesn't follow the expected trajectory, the well-meaning friends who keep trying to figure you out like you're a puzzle they should be able to solve, that confusion is not evidence of something wrong with you. It is evidence of something right with you that is simply too large for the current room. But here's where it goes deeper, and this is the part that most people aren't ready to sit with. The reason you feel like you belong to neither world isn't weakness, it's design. You were constructed at a frequency that doesn't harmonize with the ordinary. And when an instrument is tuned to a frequency nothing around it shares, it will always sound off to the untrained ear. But to the one who created the instrument, it sounds exactly right. The dissonance you've lived in wasn't a malfunction, it was preparation for a sound the world hasn't heard yet. A violin pulled from the hands of a master and placed in the hands of someone who has never encountered that instrument will produce sounds that are uncomfortable, discordant, almost painful. The strings are too tight, the resonance too complex, the technique required too foreign, and someone who has never heard a violin played well might conclude that the instrument itself is broken. But bring a master back to those same strings, draw the bow across them with the knowledge the instrument was designed to receive, and suddenly what sounded like chaos resolves into something transcendent. You are not the noise, you are the instrument waiting for the full expression of the one who made you. The preparation season. Every year that felt like wandering, every relationship that didn't quite fit, every door that closed when you were convinced it should have opened, that was the tightening of the strings. That was the refinement of the resonance. That was heaven making absolutely sure that when you sound exactly as designed. And what's coming next will likely surprise you, because it always does when we start to trace the real architecture of a life like yours. Because here is something hidden in plain sight that the enemy understood long before you did. He doesn't attack what doesn't matter. He doesn't invest resources in disrupting ordinary destinies. The warfare you have survived, the specific, surgical, personal nature of the attacks against your mind, your family, your health, your relationships, that wasn't random spiritual activity in your neighborhood. That was targeted. That was intentional. And if you will let this land for a moment, a target only exists where there is something worth destroying. Think about that with absolute honesty. Think about the nature of the resistance you have faced, not the general difficulty that every human life contains, not the ordinary friction of living in a fallen world, but the specific, almost personalized intensity of what has come against you. The way certain attacks seem designed to reach the exact place where your faith was most tender. The way certain betrayals came from the exact relationships where your trust was most open. The way certain seasons of darkness arrived at precisely the moment when you were on the edge of breakthrough, as if something invisible had surveilled your progress and calculated exactly when to strike. That precision is not accidental. Arrows are not fired at empty fields. They are fired at targets that have been assessed, studied, and identified as threats. You are not being attacked because you are weak. You are being attacked because something in the spiritual realm recognized what you carry long before the natural world caught up. Job didn't know he was having a conversation in heaven before his suffering began. He woke up one morning inside a storm he had no record of consenting to, and the people closest to him did what people always do when they can't explain someone's pain. They tried to assign sin to it. They reasoned that if he was suffering this precisely, he must have done something this precisely wrong, because ordinary minds need ordinary explanations. But Job's suffering wasn't punishment. It was endorsement. God had pointed to him in heaven and said, "Have you considered my servant?" That suffering had a signature on it, and the signature wasn't shame. It was selection. Read that again slowly in your own spirit. God did not say to the adversary, "Have you considered my most flawed servant?" He said, "Have you considered my servant?" as an expression of confidence, of investment, of demonstrated trust. The suffering that followed was not a withdrawal of favor. It was a field test for a soul that had been assessed as ready to demonstrate what faithfulness looks like when it has nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. Job lost everything that could be taken, and when the stripping was complete, what remained was the substance of the man, undiminished, unbroken, undiluted. That is what selection looks like from the inside. It is indistinguishable from abandonment until the final chapter reveals what the whole story was actually building toward. And here is the thing about final chapters. You cannot read them from the middle of the book. Stay with me, because what comes next is the part that breaks cycles. The part most people avoid because it requires them to look at something they've been protecting for a long time. You have been waiting for the world to validate what God already verified. And that waiting has cost you years. It has cost you momentum. It has kept you standing at doors that were never meant to open for you, knocking and wondering why nobody answers, when the whole time the door that was built with your name on it was somewhere else entirely. The validation you have been seeking from people who were never given the authority to grant it is not coming. And the sooner that settles, the sooner you stop performing for an audience that was never assigned to your destiny. This is one of the most costly spiritual postures a person can adopt, and it is one of the most common among those who carry unusual callings. Because the people you most want to see you are often the people most incapable of perceiving what you carry. It is not cruelty on their part, it is limitation. You cannot ask someone who has never left sea level to describe the view from the mountaintop. You cannot ask someone whose vision was shaped entirely by the familiar to confirm the outline of the unprecedented. The ones who were meant to walk with you into your assignment may not be able to recognize the assignment itself until they see it fully formed, and by then you will have moved so far forward into it that their confirmation will feel like a footnote rather than a foundation. Stop building your foundation on footnotes. The cornerstone has already been laid, and it is not the approval of those who were never meant to be your architects. Think of David in the field. When Samuel came to Jesse's house to anoint the next king of Israel, Jesse didn't even call David in from the pasture. His own father didn't consider him a candidate. And yet Samuel sat through 7 sons, 7 impressive, qualified, presentable sons, and heaven said no every single time, because the one heaven had chosen wasn't in the room where the choosing was happening. He was in the field, unbothered, tending sheep, doing the unglamorous work in the unseen place. And when he finally walked in, covered in whatever the field had left on him, Samuel heard what God said, "Rise and anoint him, for this is the one." There is something worth pausing over in that image, the field. David was not sitting somewhere polished and ready, rehearsing his acceptance speech, positioning himself for visibility. He was in the field, doing the work that nobody was watching, cultivating faithfulness in the hidden place without any indication that the hidden place was about to become the launching pad for a royal destiny. He was tending sheep, and in that tending, in the ordinary, unglamorous, unseen faithfulness of a young man doing what was put in front of him, he was simultaneously developing the instincts of a king. The courage it took to face a lion and a bear alone in a field, with no witnesses and no acclaim, was the exact courage that would later stand in a valley and face a giant when the armies of Israel had gone silent. The field was not a detour from his destiny. The field was his destiny being constructed from the inside out. Heaven doesn't need you to be in the room where people are deciding. Heaven has already decided. And once that clicks, everything shifts, because now you start to understand that your invisibility was never rejection. It was reservation. God was reserving you from the exposure that would have come too early, before the character was ready to carry the calling. The obscurity wasn't punishment, it was protection, and the delay wasn't denial. It was development happening at a depth that no shortcut could have reached. Joseph understood this, though he could not have articulated it during the pit or the prison. 17 years passed between the dream and the throne. 17 years of circumstances that looked, from every human angle, like the dream was being dismantled rather than prepared. Sold by his own brothers, enslaved in a foreign land, falsely accused, forgotten in a prison by the very man he had helped. And at every stage, the scripture quietly notes that the Lord was with Joseph. Not that the Lord was explaining Joseph's suffering, not that the Lord was rushing the timeline or shortcutting the process, just that the Lord was present in every layer of it, weaving something through the darkness that the darkness could not perceive. And when the moment finally came, when Pharaoh had a dream that no one in Egypt could interpret, when the cupbearer finally remembered the young Hebrew who had once spoken with divine clarity, Joseph was not summoned from a place of polish and preparation. He was summoned from the dungeon, and he walked into the presence of the most powerful man in the known world and released what 13 years of hidden development had built inside him. The palace was not the prize, the palace was the platform. The real prize was what the pit and the prison had produced in him, that no palace education could have generated. But let me challenge you with something, because we're entering the part of this message that demands honesty. You have been telling yourself a story about why you're not moving forward, and the story sounds spiritual, it sounds humble, it sounds like waiting on God. But if you're honest, deeply honest, some of that waiting has been fear dressed in the language of faith. You have called it patience when it was paralysis. You have called it discernment when it was avoidance. You have stayed in the preparation season past its expiration, because stepping into the appointed moment means stepping into visibility, and visibility means risk, and risk means you could fail, and failure in front of people who already doubted you feels unbearable. And this is where the enemy is most sophisticated in his strategy against the unusually called. He doesn't need to convince you to abandon your faith. He doesn't need to pull you into obvious sin or visible rebellion. All he needs to do is keep you spiritually comfortable, keep you consuming rather than creating, absorbing rather than releasing, praying about the assignment without ever moving toward it. He will use your sensitivity against you, whispering that you're not ready, that the timing isn't right, that you should seek one more confirmation, fast one more week, wait for one more sign. Because a calling that is perpetually in preparation poses no threat to him. It is only the calling that steps into action that disrupts his plans. And he knows that better than you do. But here is what the enemy doesn't want you to know. The anointing was never designed to protect you from risk. It was designed to sustain you through it. Moses didn't part the sea from a safe distance. He walked toward it, staff raised, people screaming behind him, army thundering behind them, with nowhere logical to go. The miracle didn't come until his feet got close enough to the water that stepping back was no longer an option. The activation was in the advancement. There is a version of Moses that stays 40 years more in the desert and calls it waiting on God. There is a version that turns back at the first sound of Pharaoh's chariots and calls it wisdom. There is a version that plants the staff in the sand at a safe distance and waits for the sea to part before moving. And in every one of those versions, the miracle doesn't come, because the miracle was never designed to remove the need for faith. It was designed to meet faith at the point of action. The sea parted because someone was already walking toward it with everything at stake. The miracle required the movement, and the movement required someone who had settled in their spirit that the one who called them was more reliable than the evidence in front of them. And what's about to come next? This is where the real transformation begins, because beneath the fear, beneath the performance, beneath the waiting, there is something even more subtle at work. something that hides behind spiritual language so convincingly that most people never name it. And it is this: you have become more comfortable with your potential than your purpose. Potential is safe. Potential carries no accountability. Potential allows you to remain admired without being tested. You can live your whole life in the currency of almost ready, almost there, almost the right time. And the tragedy is that almost doesn't transform anything. Potential is a promise that has not yet been asked to keep itself. It lives in a comfortable space between what you are and what you could be, and that space can become a residence if you're not careful. People around you see the potential and affirm it, and that affirmation becomes its own kind of reward. A reward that requires nothing from you except that you continue to exist in the vicinity of your greatness without actually entering it. You become known for what you might do. You become celebrated for what people believe you're capable of. And somewhere on the way, the might and the capable become substitutes for the actual, for the released, for the deployed, for the done. Purpose, on the other hand, is demanding. Purpose is, on the other hand, is demanding. Purpose is public. Purpose costs. And the ones who carry assignments as rare as yours have been conditioned by their pain to associate cost with loss. So when purpose comes knocking and brings a price tag, something in you flinches. Something in you finds a reason to wait one more season, because every time you paid a price in the past, you were not always given the receipt that proved it was worth it. You invested faith and faced silence. You stepped out and got knocked back. You loved deeply and were left. You served faithfully and were overlooked. And the accumulation of those experiences has built a pattern in your nervous system. A pattern that says cost equals wound, and wound equals evidence that you misread the call. So now, when purpose arrives and the cost becomes visible, that pattern fires before your faith can respond. It is not weakness, it is the scar tissue of a warrior who has taken real hits in real battles. But scar tissue, if it is never addressed, can harden around the very places where you need the most flexibility. The healing that is required now is not just spiritual. It is the deeply personal, deeply honest work of separating the cost of purpose from the cost of pain. They are not the same thing. One strips you, the other completes you. But here's the part you probably didn't expect. The thing that has been blocking you is not the enemy. It is not your past. It is not the people who betrayed you, the doors that closed, or the prayers that seemed to go unanswered. The thing that has been blocking you is the unspoken belief that you are too much, that what lives inside you is so large, so unusual, so outside of normal, that releasing it fully would overwhelm the people around you, distance the ones you love, or place you so far out in front that you can never come back to the familiar. This is the belief that never gets named out loud. It lives below the level of conscious thought, operating like a governor on an engine, allowing you to accelerate toward your calling just enough to feel the movement, just enough to maintain the hope, but never enough to actually reach the speed you were built for. And it is rooted in love. That is what makes it so difficult to identify and so easy to justify. You are not shrinking because you are afraid of greatness in the abstract. You are shrinking because you love specific people, and you have watched what full visibility costs relationships. You have seen how rising can separate. You have felt the chill that enters a room when you say something that came from too deep a place for the conversation you were in. You have learned to manage your depth so that the people you love don't feel left behind. And that is not a character flaw. It is a tender heart trying to navigate an impossible geometry. You have been shrinking your assignment to fit the comfort of your relationships. You have been dimming your frequency to avoid the loneliness of being fully seen. And the loneliness of being fully seen is real. This is not something to minimize. There is a specific, particular ache that comes with allowing the fullness of what you carry to become visible, because it invites a kind of scrutiny and a kind of solitude that is different from the loneliness of hiddenness. When you are hidden, you can tell yourself that connection is waiting on the other side of visibility. But when you step into visibility and discover that even there, the depth of what you carry outpaces the depth of what the room can hold, that loneliness has a different texture. It does not feel like preparation. It feels like the answer was wrong, and yet it is precisely in that exposed, fully deployed, nobody around me understands this place, that the most powerful partnerships with heaven are forged. Abraham in Canaan, with no one around him who shared the covenant. Elijah under the juniper tree, convinced he was the only one left. Paul in prison, writing letters to churches that would outlast every empire. The deepest collaborations with divine purpose have always happened in the places where human company ran thin. And until that breaks, until you give yourself permission to be exactly as expansive as heaven designed you to be, the calling stays sealed, not because God is withholding it, but because you keep folding it back up every time it begins to unfold. There is a moment in the life of every seed that is the most critical moment of its entire existence. It is not the planting, it is not the watering, it is not the long, dark, underground gestation that feels like nothing is happening when everything is happening. The most critical moment is the one where the seed coat begins to break open, where the life inside pushes against the boundary that has protected it until now, and the boundary begins to give way. That moment is irreversible. Once the seed coat breaks, the seed can never go back to being a seed. It is now a plant, and it will either grow or die, but it cannot return to the comfortable containment of what it was before the breaking. You are at that moment. The coat is breaking, the life inside is pushing, and the question is not whether you are ready. The question is whether you will allow the breaking to complete, or whether you will try to press yourself back into an enclosure that no longer fits. This is your moment to stop folding. The world is not confused because you're broken. It's confused because it has never encountered someone who carries the weight of heaven without the weight of religion, who walks in spiritual authority without the costume of performance, who has been through enough fire to be dangerous and enough grace to still be gentle. That is not a contradiction. That is a completed work, because fire and grace together produce something that neither one produces alone. Fire without grace produces hardness. A person who has endured enough to be strong but not enough to remain tender, who has been through enough to command authority but has let the process evacuate the compassion. And grace without fire produces something beautiful but untested, a gentleness that has never been pressed, a love that has never been required to hold its shape under pressure. But fire and grace together, the specific combination of someone who has walked through the furnace and come out not smelling like smoke, who has been in the water and not been drowned, who has carried loss and still shows up with open hands, that combination is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily necessary, because the people who will be drawn to what you carry are not looking for someone who has had it easy. They are looking for someone who has had it hard and still chose the light. They need to see that it is possible. They need a living testimony, not a polished presentation. You are not between worlds. You are a bridge between them. And bridges are built specifically for the gap. A bridge does not apologize for the distance between where it begins and where it ends. A bridge does not collapse at span to make the crossing shorter. A bridge stands at full extension, bearing the weight of every person who needs to get from here to there, holding steady in the wind and the weather, anchored on both ends to something solid enough to hold. You are not built to live entirely on one bank. You are built to span the distance between what people are and what they are capable of becoming, between the broken and the restored, between the question and the answer, between the hunger and the bread. That is not a burden. That is a blueprint. And it is the most specific, most intentional, most carefully constructed blueprint heaven has ever drafted for a single human life. Place your hand on your heart and declare this with me. I release the need to be understood by those who were never assigned to my story. I release the fear of my own fullness. I release every season of shrinking, every moment of silence that was cowardice dressed as humility, every year I spent waiting for permission that heaven already gave me at birth. I receive the fullness of my assignment. I receive the courage to be seen at the frequency I was actually created to carry. I step forward, not when I feel ready, not when the path is clear, not when the people around me catch up, but now, because the one who called me has never been confused about what I am. And starting today, neither am I. Let that declaration settle into your bones, not just your mind, your bones. Because declarations that live only in the mind evaporate when the circumstances push back. But a declaration that reaches the marrow, that gets into the place where your body and your spirit connect, that becomes the kind of knowing that does not require daily reconvincing. You will face moments after this where the old narrative tries to reassert itself, where the familiar voices, internal and external, try to remind you of all the reasons the folding made sense. And in those moments, what you need is not a new argument. What you need is this, the settled, unshakable, bone-deep recognition that you have already been chosen, already been verified, already been endorsed by the one whose opinion is the only one that has ever carried actual authority over your life. The world will catch up to what heaven has already said about you. It may not be today, it may not be in the next season, but the catching up is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is the stepping. Your responsibility is the obedience. Your responsibility is to stop waiting for the audience to take their seats before you begin to play, and to trust that the music you carry is so designed, so specific, so complete that when it sounds at full volume, the right ears will hear it from distances you cannot currently imagine. You are not an accident assembled at the intersection of random events. You are a deliberate composition, drafted in heaven, refined through fire, shaped by sorrow, and sustained by a grace that was calculated to be exactly sufficient for exactly what you were designed to carry. Every piece of your story, including the pieces that still feel unresolved, including the chapters that still feel unfinished, including the wounds that still press when you move in certain directions. Every piece is part of the architecture. Nothing has been wasted. Nothing has gone unnoticed. Nothing has slipped through the fingers of the one who holds the design. And the categories they tried to put you in, leave them empty. They were never built for you. They were never meant to contain what you carry. The measuring instruments of ordinary life will always return an error message when applied to someone who is built for something extraordinary. That error message is not your problem. It is their limitation and your liberation. Your complete, unhindered, full-frequency liberation begins the moment you stop trying to make their instruments read correctly and start walking in the truth that the only measurement that has ever mattered was taken before you were born, in a place no human system can access, by a designer who has never second-guessed the work. You are not too much. You are exactly enough. You are exactly the right amount of fire and grace, of depth and tenderness, of strength and vulnerability, of ancient knowing and present moment courage. You are not the confused one in the room. You are the clarifying one, and the world, your specific corner of it, the people who are waiting for what only you carry. The world is ready for you to arrive at the fullness of what you were sent to be.